Hey, from Bugeye Guy, look at this cool car. Isn't this thing awesome? This is a car we just bought on Bring a Trailer for a client, and we bought it because it has just the right look. It's fantastic. And what we're going to do with it is turn it into a land speed record car. So this is a huge project for us. We have a client in the Midwest who wanted us to get him the right car to turn it into a land speed record holder, and this is our candidate. Now there's a ton of stuff we need to do to this thing. It will take at least a year to prepare it. I want to in this video talk a little about this car, how we'll get there, and also to talk a little about these online auctions like Bring a Trailer. There are a number of things that unfortunately don't come through in the auction and they end up in our lap to fix, and so I'll talk a little about that as well in this video. But this car has a 948 engine. All the stuff is going to get removed anyway, quite frankly. I want to show you, though, a Corvair that a fellow named Gregory Lloyd has. This thing is awesome. It's gone 146.5 miles an hour. And he points out right away, he's one of the people who will help us get there, that the salt is like sand. You lose a lot of traction. The heat is 100 degrees, 4,600 feet. You got to put out a lot of power. And it's not a small feat. So his car is modified. Ours will probably be stock. This is our candidate, though. And I will tell you, I just think if I was going to build my own little model car, a Bugeye Sprite for my desk, it would look a lot like this. I love the color scheme, these Gulf team colors, tribute colors, and this wonderful Lexan windscreen is really just perfect. It's very elegant and simple how this was done. Really, I can't say enough about the style of this car. They built it like a sort of 70s period look with the right steering wheel and just the simplicity and crudeness. And so I'm very fond of this style of a Bugeye because it captures the look and feel that these old sports cars have for so many of us. So really a wonderful looking build. But then you see things like there's a tremendous paint blend there by the fuel fill from an old fuel melt, I bet. But hey, it's a race car, and these kinds of things are to be expected. There's also the rear axle's not quite aligned. You see one wheel is a little proud of the other. It's hard to see, but a little easier to see underneath. One of the wheels sticks out more than the other. It's the left one. And you know, there's just a bunch of stuff on this thing it's going to need to be rebuilt extensively. There's some lumpiness all in the rear fender and I think that's the challenge with these auctions, is that you don't really get, the crowd picks on what it picks on, but you don't always get to see what the guy who ends up with the car is actually going to have to fix. And I wanted to show you some of that here. So moving underneath the car, it's in pretty nice shape. It has the usual things like leaking rear shocks and check straps that are vulnerable. It has a pinion seal that's leaking. You'll find also that the bump stops are really close to the body of the car, so there's not much travel, which is great for salt flats use. Not ideal for street use, but anyway, something to note. The fuel pump would need rubber mounts for street use, and the fuel pickup's a little bit off. It's working, but those are prone to leakage, and it's an older tank, so we'll change all that. The one thing that I noticed also is that the split nuts for the leaf spring U-bolts, those are not socked down properly, partly because they lowered the car maybe a bit too much. You can sort of see how the drive shaft isn't exactly centered in the tunnel there. It's a little over to the left, and that's an indicator of the out of alignment of the rear axle. But again, we'll take care of that. And then you have this gigantic exhaust pipe, which is just scraping liability. And then you have this tiny front header, so that needs to be changed. Of course, for modified racing and whatnot, we can change that. A leaking slave cylinder, as most of these have. And then we have uneven front coil springs, so we have a bunch of washers on one side and much bigger spacers on the left side. Hopefully not because of crash damage, but they may just be uneven springs, which happens. It happens. Look, we're all doing the best we can getting these old cars to work, and they all have a long story to tell. So most of this stuff is pretty normal, but I just sometimes feel like these online auctions, everybody's raving, and you feel like you got the best car. When you get it, there's a cracked water hose there. Not a big deal to change, but these are all the things that are going to need attention on this car, and I'm not so sure that it always comes across. People call me up and say, hey, did you see that car? It was the greatest ever. Well, they're all the greatest ever until they show up and you then have to fix all the details. So there's another funny thing that I missed in the auction, which is that this oil cooler, the hoses are plugged, so that's fine. I mean, it looks really cool, but it's not doing anything. And otherwise, the engine bay is really clean. I like what they did here, and lots of good potential there. We're going to rip out this engine. We have to produce the most possible horsepower we can out of a 948 engine, so we will have a totally different balanced and blueprinted engine, a high-performance engine to run at high altitude and to try to break the speed record. So this is all just a good foundation for us. And then as you move along to driving the car, I'll show you the first thing you're going to hear when I start and try and move it is a click in the rear end because of the worn wire wheel splines. That's another thing. Here's a worn left front shock. You can see how loose it is and how much it bounces, and much stiffer on this side. The windscreen is so cool. And then on the take-up, it's when those splines will clack. So we'll change those rear splines. Actually, we're going to change to a 4-bolt pattern for racing anyway. And the car's pretty rattly and noisy. Actually, the seats are horribly uncomfortable. We will change those anyway, but that doesn't come across online either. And the transmission, the synchros, the third gear synchro is pretty much gone. You can see how much I'm bouncing on the road. I mean, these cars are obviously never comfortable, but they're particularly uncomfortable when you have no padding at all. And this is a racing seat. It's fine. And again, all I wanted to do was just to try and show what you end up with when you buy an online auction car. It's a lot easier to fall in love with them before they're delivered. And you can shift into third gear in this car. You just have to be very gentle, and downshifting is hard. And this is another chronic challenge with these cars. You can double clutch to downshift, and if it's in your blood and you can do it, then good for you, it's fine. A lot of newer owners are not familiar with these old gearboxes, and they have a harder time with it. Another issue that we have is we have scraping tire to nose interface, so that also has to be dealt with. You can usually hear that at slow speed. I know all the gauges, well, the oil pressure gauge and the temp gauge are working, but the rest we will repair. Lots of repairs ahead. And in fact, teching a car for Bonneville is going to be brutal. I mean, it's and rightfully so. So we will learn a lot, I'm sure, and we will make this thing wonderful, and that's what we're up to this week. This is just the beginning of a year-long adventure for us, and we will have more updates here on our site. You can watch how we rip this thing apart and put it all back together again. We will also run a hard top, and also a stock windshield will be required, and that will make it even harder. And how fast can we get this thing to go? Let's watch at bugeyeguy.com.